way before your time, there was a guy called Winston Churchill, and he used to fart and smoke cigars and drink too much whiskey. But that's another story.
Hey guys, welcome to Serious Laughs. This is episode 24, part 1. The man with the front row seat on Hollywood, politics, and murder.
A 60-year career journalist and investigative reporter shares the inside scoop. Welcome, Ivor Davis.
Thank you, and good morning from California. And I'm not sure where you guys are and where the rest of the world is, but I know I'm in Southern California. That's all I do know.
We don't know where we are mentally, physically, spiritually. Maybe
all over
we
the
never
place.
do. We're coming to you from Houston.
We are.
Houston?
Yep.
Okay, yeah.
We
Houston,
are, and we're having a cold snap.
nice in Houston now, but I remember going to Houston once, and it was like going into a steam bath.
This is fact.
Better than an armpit. That's sometimes what I start to think when it's like June
armpits
through
can be pretty smelly. Yeah, you're right. That's right. Yeah.
Yeah, you don't want to fart then. It's just going to stay. It's just going to be a cling wrap of farts.
Yes.
Sheri,
okay.
you have this.
Can we sing the praise of Ivor? Let's
sing the
pronounce
praise.
that odor. Okay, guys,
you
need to listen up. All right. If you're stuck in traffic, that's a blessing because you're going to hear from Ivor Davis, who's an American correspondent. He has been a weekly columnist for the New York Times Syndicate. A colleague referred to Ivor as a hybrid Forrest Gump and Zelig. He is the author. He is a best-selling author. The Devil is My Friend, The Inside Story of a Malibu Murder. The Beatles and Me on Tour, 60th anniversary. The Mansion Exposed book, a reporter's 50-year journey into madness and murder. We are all about relationships here on this podcast, and you really take the cake with relationships, Ivor. I mean, there's nothing you haven't covered in your 60-year career. Now, we do have questions for you, but we want to hear you have a monologue for us.
Yes, I do. A monologue is not the right word. You know, a monologue can sometimes put you to sleep. And at this time in the morning, none of us want to do that. But when I woke up this morning, I thought, I'm going to be on with a dynamic duo. What do I want to say from the outset? So a few brief words. As we all know, what the world needs now, more than ever before, is serious laughs. Okay? So here's a wide-ranging group of subjects that I thought we might talk about, not necessarily in order of importance. Okay? 1, how to clean out your fridge. Okay? 2, how to dodge the avalanche of scams that are coming at us. And believe me, I went to a district attorney conference and they were talking about scams coming out of everywhere. Okay? Surviving Attila the Hun in Washington, D.C. Paul McCartney ain't what he used to be, but who is? Big Brother is no longer watching you because he's living next door. Okay? Elon Musk is not a new aftershave lotion. I'm leaving next week for a few days at the Trump Tower on the beach in Gaza City. I love funny women. What the world needs now is more funny women. I love funny women. So, Sheri and Molly, bring it on.
Woo!
Oh, dang. Hang on. I think I have some music for that.
Awesome. Yeah, we need to do like a whole, we're going to get you going viral. There were memes upon memes in there.
Oh.
Yeah. Well, yeah.
It's so ridiculous. Anyways,
Yeah,
pause,
you too. I love all this. I love this already. We've only been on the air for an hour and 10 minutes.
Yeah, right. Does it feel like that? Bummer.
Oh,
Can-
yeah, that stinks, and nobody's farted. Does it really really seem like it's been that long?
No,
You're
I can say,
being
well,
funny.
okay. So
Okay,
That
where
was
were we?
fantastic.
that was
That
I
was
sent you a list of
fantastic.
questions, and I thought, well, I'm going to solve the world's problems. Anyway, let's talk about anything that's funny and serious and unserious and belly
Oh my God.
laughable. Anyway, go ahead.
Ivor,
Let's
I
do
don't
it,
know about you,
Sheri.
Molly. We become one mind on the show. That's a whole thing to unpack there in itself. But what I'm thinking, Molly, is we need to have Ivor back on.
Of
Do
course.
you like the way I talk about you in the third person?
Yeah, I know it's lovely.
we need to have this bloke on again.
Invisible.
No, never. No, wow. Okay, okay, Sheri, focus. Where is your cigarette? I can't find it. Oh, there's my fag. Where's my fag?
All right, Sheri.
All right,
There
ready?
you go. Just take a.
All right. Now we'll be serious. Ivor, you've been privy to major historical events and people as an investigative reporter and journalist that very few can ever even dream of experiencing. From being there when Elvis Presley and the Beatles met for the first time in 1965 to literally being in the Ambassador Hotel kitchen when then presidential nominee Bobby Kennedy was shot in 1968. I don't know where to begin with questions. But since our podcast focuses on relationships, what would you say the biggest takeaways about human nature are across the celebrities, the politicians, and even the cold-blooded murderers you've spoken with and known personally? So just like an easy question, right?
Yeah,
Like I gave
that
you
is a
nothing.
very simple question.
That's like
Can we go
so
on to the next? Can we go on to the next question? No, seriously. I mean, the ridiculous thing is when you ask me a question like that, and I'm not saying it's a ridiculous question, believe me, although it may be slightly. The point is that when you are doing these things and living these things, and when you girls get a bit older, you'll understand it. You don't sit down and write about it right away. You write about it as a news story. You report it, and then you get on with the next situation. I mean, for example, I remember when I covered the Beatles in 1964. I got off that incredible whirlwind of 5 weeks on tour with them. I went home, and the office called me up and said, the Warren Commission report has just come out. We want you to read it and summarize it and give us a story. So you go from the Beatles to the Warren Commission report on the assassination of John F. Kennedy, just like that. So you don't have time in the world of journalism, fast-paced journalism, to sit back, enjoy the moment, or not the moment of the assassination, the moment of the Beatles, because I forgot about the Beatles until a few years later. I mean, it sounds ridiculous. So in my career and in many people's lives, you've got to sit back for a second, maybe keep a diary, keep a journal, write something down. But otherwise, you're on with the next problem, you're on with the next story, you're on with the next podcast. And I don't know if that explains it, but that's the craziness of journalism and that, and even for all our lives, whether you're not a daily journalist, that's it. Things happen so fast without warning that you have to be able to adjust. And that's what I do. If somebody calls me up and says, we're going on the trip to Hawaii tomorrow, and then tomorrow comes and they say, well, I'm afraid I'm not feeling well. We're not going. You have to take it. You have to take the punches. Anyway, it's a rambling answer. I apologize.
No, you're not rambling on. That makes absolute sense. And it doesn't speak only to journalism. I think it speaks to life itself. I mean, we say, well, I have to get the car fixed and I have to pick up my kids or I have to go to the dentist or blah, or. And the next thing you know, and I think it was one of the Beatles that said this, right? I just realized that. Life happens while you're busy making other plans. Who said that?
Oh, yeah.
Who said
That's
that?
a song.
Is that?
Well, maybe one of your listeners will send you a telegram. What's a telegram? Who knows what a telegram is? Oh, God, it
Morse
tells you how
code.
old I am, huh?
Telegram is like Instagram, but like for old people, all right?
I
Well,
just want to say, once you mention that magic word, old people, it hits home in the solar plexus, which is if you ever hit anybody in the solar plexus hard, they're out of breath, they're gasping on the floor. Anyway, I forget where I was going with this because this is serious silly, isn't it? Okay, so go ahead.
Well, okay, so we touched on the Beatles a little bit, and I know you speak about this a lot in podcasts and when people have you on. So I hope you enjoy speaking on it. You spent a lot of time with the Beatles. Do you have a couple of stories that are your favorite stories to tell, or funny stories or dramatic stories, or something you want people to know that they might not expect?
There are so many. The thing about my travels with the Beatles was I had amazing access to them. Once they got to know me, their door was open. I was in the room next door. They had a suite next door. I'd wander in there. I'd raid their mini bar, help myself to whatever was in the mini bar. They were sitting on the floor writing songs. I mean, you can't. I mean, you say Ivor, you're making it up, but I'm not making it up. And we'd chat, because in today's world, if you went out on tour with Taylor Swift, you wouldn't walk into her room and raid the mini bar. I don't think so. Maybe there's all these other singers whose names are now odd names. You can probably remind me. I have fun with my. There's somebody called Lips. What's her name now? The lovely singer who writes a song with a brother with an Irish name.
Billie Eilish.
Billie Eilish, yes. Billie Eilish. Now, I tell my granddaughter that I saw Billie Eilish perform on the Grammy show, and she says, "Grandpa, it's Billie Eilish." But I like calling her Billie Eilish. I'm sorry. I think that so anyway,
Great.
this is getting out.
You know what? Billie Eilish would probably like you calling her Billie Eilish.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
It's cute.
And then they have other names that I write them down when I'm watching the Grammys. It's like Fiona Bellbottom or Gloria Gaseous, or I mean, look at the names of all these people. I mean, give me a couple of the big hit. Taylor Swift is all right. She's a Swiftie. She makes a lot of money as a Swiftie, and they charge $600 for a seat to see Taylor Swift. I mean, I'm going all over the place, but so bring me back into line, please.
A story. Well, you did give a story about you'd go in the room and raid the mini bar.
Raid the mini bar, yeah. And the other funny story was that John Lennon was a night owl, and as I say, I was in the next room to their suite, and he called me at 3 in the morning, and said, "We're playing Monopoly. I'd come over," and I go over there, and there was George was sometimes up playing, but we played Monopoly, the English Monopoly that the Beatles had brought with them. And I always like to tell this story because John was very wickedly funny. He liked to needle you, but he also, and again, keep this to yourself, he also was a big cheat in Monopoly. Now, for those of your listeners who don't know Monopoly, it was a thing called a board game that kids used to play in the old days, World War II, going back 100 years, no, maybe only 50 years. Anyway, so they brought their Monopoly, and John rolled the dice playing Monopoly. And when he cheated, he absolutely cheated. And whenever he landed on a property that he didn't want, he'd roll again until he landed on a property that he did want. So John Lennon was at heart, besides the stuff that he did, he was a property mogul. You didn't know that, did you?
No.
And I learned that when I played Monopoly at 2:00 in the morning with him. So I mean, so that's one story. There's so many, and Paul McCartney was always an incredible. I'm going to use that famous Irish expression, schmoozer. Well, maybe it isn't Irish schmoozer. You may have heard it. Anyway, and he'd come down the private jet we all travelled on, and he'd say, "What do you want to drink, Ivor?" And I said, "Gin and tonic." And then he'd give me a gin and tonic, and I wouldn't tip him because I knew he was well paid. And then the next day he would come down and say, "Do you want another drink, Ivor?" And I'd say, "A gin and tonic, but Paul, a little more tonic, too much gin last time." So Paul was my sort of waiter and a genial guy who went on to earn a lot of money. And I love to talk about, because my new book has, see if you can guess. Okay, Paul McCartney is the richest rock star in the world. Taylor Swift is catching him up. And Billie Eilish, I don't know, she's in the background. Anyway, so how much do you think Paul McCartney is worth?
Oh, geez.
The richest musician in the world right now?
Yes.
Is that what you said?
Yes. Take a guess.
Molly, you go first, baby.
Wait, hang on. 500 million.
Okay, 500 million. What do you think?
1 billion.
Okay, you're very close. 1.4 billion.
Oh my!
And
God.
the problem is that Ringo, remember Ringo? He plays the drums.
Uh-huh.
Ringo.
Oh yeah, we dated. Yeah.
What? He's the poverty guy. Ringo is only worth, and don't get. I don't want to mention this because people may send in donations to you for Ringo. Ringo is worth only $400 million. So I mean, if you know how to get by every year on $400 million, send me a note, because that is a poverty line, isn't it?
That is.
Anyway.
Wow. I think that was just a caller that we had that wanted to donate to Ringo's fund.
Okay, for Ringo, make it the Ringo Ivor Davis Fund and send the money to me.
There you go.
What about? Were there any like little idiosyncrasies? I mean, you mentioned John Lennon had affinity for cheating. Were there any like, where people ate with their mouths open, or like at the start of the show we were talking about all kinds of farts? Were there any things like that maybe never made it to the book, or you're thinking about putting in the book?
I mean, when certain members, and I don't want to bring the certain members, as we're on a low ebb of comedy, certain members in the private jet, if they farted, we wanted parachutes, but because it was either die in the plane or jump out in a parachute. But Brian Epstein, the manager, said no parachutes allowed, so that was thrown away. Anyway, because we all traveled with him on the private jet. And I must tell you about George Harrison. Now, George Harrison, at that time, don't forget, they were young men. They were in their early 20s. George Harrison and I had to write George Harrison's column every week, okay? Now, George Harrison, for those who may remember, old enough to remember, George Harrison was a bit of a taciturn guy. He was quiet. He didn't have much to say for himself. He never smiled. And I later on discovered that maybe because in England you don't have to go to the dentist very often to have hygienists clean your teeth at ridiculous amounts of money. And George never did that. So he smiled, and his teeth weren't that brilliant. Anyway, sorry about that, George. So George sat with me, and I tried to write George's column. Long story short, George went to bed at 3 a.m., woke up at 3 p.m. and missed my deadline. So for the first couple of weeks of the tour, I made up George's column. Okay, keep that to yourself. Don't tell anybody. So then on the plane one day, George came and sat down next to me and said, "Ivor, my mum called me from Liverpool and said she's been reading my column." And I said, "Well, what about it, George?" And George said, "She says it's a bunch of fucking rubbish." Fucking rubbish. So you can translate that. I said, Yeah, well, it probably is, George, because I made it up. You didn't wake up. Wake up. Talk to me. And he did. And after that, we got on very well. And I'll just say one other thing about George Harrison. He blossomed once the Beatles broke up. I mean, George used to say, I am a member of the Beatles group. He said, I'm a member of the Beatles group and I play the guitar. And sometimes they let me sing. So that tells you where George realized he was. Anyway, I don't want to keep going on, but George was much better. George became a film producer. He made, he wrote songs. Here Comes the Sun. I mean, so much great stuff George did later in life. Anyway, who have we missed out?
Were you ever present when they were creating the music for the first time?
Well, I never, let me just say that during the tour, they had a monstrous timetable and they had a monstrous timetable for writing music. Don't forget, this was September and they had to write 15 new songs for the Christmas album, okay? So everywhere we went, I mean, it was in the plane, in their hotel room, and talk about in their hotel room. I used to walk in there and there was John and Paul sitting on the floor writing music. And they were writing music. I got a piece of paper here. They wrote the music. Don't like that. They got this and they aimed at the waste paper basket like that. And they missed the waste paper basket and it fell on the floor. Stupid me never picked that up. Never picked up those pieces of paper. Would you have done it? And the reason I mention it is somebody just sold Bob Dylan's screwed up piece of paper for about $1.2 million.
Oh, God.
I could be rich. I could be rich. I could be off in Hawaii or somewhere. And now, because who knew? Anyway, so
You didn't know because you were living history, right? Nobody.
yes, when you're living history, in a way, unless you're brilliant and have, I don't know, you don't think about it. I mean, I'll ask you the question. I mean, if something happens like what's happening in Washington right now, do you bother, what's going on, do you bother to sit down and see what's going on in the Washington DC's Monty Python's Flying Circus? No.
Right.
I mean,
No.
Monty Python's Flying Circus, do you know, it was a fantastic show on British television. It was crazy, it was insane, and it was funny, and the Beatles loved it, and they loved that show. Anyway, so the point I'm making is that, you don't know, maybe 5 years from now, 10 years from now, they're going to say, what's happening in Washington, D.C. in the year 2025? And you're going to say, well, Elon Musk was president, and there was another guy that was there with orange hair, can't remember his name, and so on and so forth. Anyway, sorry, I don't want to make this too political, but
No, it's hard to resist right now. I mean, I can't tell the difference between politics and comedy and tragedy.
well, I mean, there you go. That's a great line. I can't tell the difference between politics and comedy. I'm just going to write that down. I like that. Because it's true.
Tragedy.
I mean, every time I put the telly on, there's something, what was it now? Bobby Kennedy Jr.? Oh, my God. I mean, here's a guy that is now Minister of Health and Education. I mean, Minister of Health. I mean, you can't write the script.
No,
You
but
cannot
Ivor, Molly, to be serious now, I mean, it's really not Bobby Kennedy that's running our health. It's his worm.
Yeah, well, that I'm glad you brought that up because I thought that was a bit too indigestible for this time of the morning. But you're right. It was a worm on the brain, right? A brain worm. Well, I mean, I suppose. I mean, that is a brilliant point you have made. If you don't mind me saying, Sheri.
Oh no,
because
you make me want to smoke my fag again.
Junior, it's not Junior. You're right. It's the worm that is doing all this. Okay, then I forgive him. Anyway.
It's not. Yeah, it's not his fault.
Maybe not.
And Elon Musk, it's not his fault either because he's an alien.
Hey, that's a wrap on part 1. Thanks for joining us today. Make sure you tune in next week for the second half of our interview with Ivor Davis. Please make sure to like and subscribe and keep finding the best and the worst because life's too ridiculous not to laugh at it.